Thank you very much for joining me, David
Sure.
Sepkoski. Let's talk a little bit about the experience that we've had together. I'd love to
Sure.
hear, um, first of all, was it worth it to you?
Yeah,
Is
sure.
it something you're glad you did?
Of course. Well, yeah, very much so. I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm David Sepkoski. I'm a professor of the history of science at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I basically responded to an early call that you sent out to folks in my position who had trade book interests and needed some help getting started. And I'm really glad I did. We worked together for several months, 4 months or so, intensively on refining the idea for the book and working on a trade book proposal, and successfully got an agent after that process, and just recently successfully got a deal with Princeton University Press for a trade book, not an academic monograph, and we're very happy with that. Yeah, I mean, I guess um, I can say a few things about what I thought was really valuable about working with you. Um, you know, I mean, first and foremost, working with you really demystified the trade process. I mean, I've known people who've had agents and trade contracts and things like that. I have friends who've done that, but I was never exactly sure whether that was something that was available to me, how I would go about figuring out the process of writing a trade proposal, what the real value of an agent was, what I should be looking out for when meeting with editors and things like that. So I mean, that's really great. And I mean, working directly with you was really, really helpful, but I've also sat in on a few of your, webinars and discussion groups, and invited you for a half-day workshop at my institution. So I had a chance to really kind of get a sense of the full range of things that you do, and I think it's an incredibly valuable service for academics. I mean, you sort of pitch this to senior academics, but I mean, I think anybody who's already had at least one monograph can benefit from this. And I want to stress that whether someone is looking to publish with a commercial trade press or with a university press, whether it's full trade or sort of academic crossover, I think that this is valuable for academics who are simply looking to make their work more accessible, make their books more accessible. So, I mean, I think the advice that you provide can be useful for someone who wants to try to publish a big book with Random House, or someone that wants to just, have a lively and accessible book with a more traditional academic publisher, Chicago or Princeton or Yale or Harvard or California or something like that. And so that's something that we have conversations about, especially in the humanities, um, you know, what is good academic writing, what's the difference between that and trade writing. And I think that, your perspective, and it's one that I agree with, and I think more and more editors are looking for, is that there shouldn't really be a difference between academic writing and trade writing, right? I mean, as you say, good writing is good writing.
Absolutely.
And I think many people who enter professions, academic professions, especially in the humanities, do love writing and have, been good writers for a long time, but, we've all learned certain, I don't know, a certain style or approach that I think many of us have found limiting over the years, right? I mean, the process of graduate school and then professionalization and all, it kind of teaches you to write in a style that may not feel like um, the engaging prose that you would want to be writing. And so part of the value also is just kind of um, rediscovering or reinventing yourself as an academic writer and being more true to your own voice and things like that. Because I think we're all tired of reading kind of pro forma monographic style writing. And I just want to stress that Folks may not think, oh, well, my book's not going to sell 100,000 copies and I'm not going to get a, contract with Random House or something like that, but it's still valuable to be thinking about the craft of writing as academics. And I think that that's something that can, benefit folks with all kinds of different projects.
It's so interesting you say that because that's been one of my big learning kind of the things that I've really learned from the first couple of years of doing this that really surprised me. I mean, actually, when I started out, I went in kind of, full bore. What I really want to get you guys is a big trade book, is Random House, HarperCollins, whatever. All of my marketing material is, aimed in that direction. That's kind of how I think. I want to see like maximum success for my clients, lots of money and attention and, all the things. But what's really surprised me is again and again, some of my happiest clients are the ones that don't end up doing that. I've had several clients who, for one reason or another, they haven't been able to get an agent or they haven't been able to get that kind of, kind of big book deal. And I've ended up with some of these like crossover publishers and what have you. And I've sort of gone, oh, I'm really sorry. I feel like I've let you down. And what I keep hearing is, you don't know, you don't understand. Like this has been the best thing I've ever done. Like this book is so much better than it would have been otherwise. People in my life can actually read this. It actually kind of like flows, and I can give it to my mother, and and that I underestimate somehow sometimes how much that does actually mean to academics. It's not just about getting the big book deal. A lot of times it's just about having a book that you can go out to the world with and know that people can read it. And that it communicates in a different way, and that it like, allows you to express your ideas in a way that are kind of human.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I've been keeping an eye the last year or so on, books that the New York Times or the New Yorker pick as like, books we're reading right now or books that we're anticipating. And I look at the nonfiction and, yeah, there are, plenty of books from, Penguin Random House and, Knopf and stuff like that. But there are also plenty of books from Yale, Princeton, Harvard,
Yep.
Duke, etc. And you never know. You never know what's going to, I mean, a decent university press will attempt to get your book reviewed by the Times, etc. Whether or not they're going to, you know, do the review is, in part going to be based on how accessible the book seems. And so, the general reading public doesn't necessarily distinguish a whole lot between reasonably priced, trade or crossover book that comes from a UP or from one of the big five, New York publishers. So you're always putting yourself, I think, in a better position, whether it's just with colleagues in your field, reading and taking notice, or getting some crossover interest, etc., if you write more accessibly. I mean, there's just no question about it.
And you can, I've had clients who are very interested in appealing even to other scholars in other fields, right? I mean, if you're a historian and you have something you want to say that you're hoping, let's say you're a historian of, 20th century America and you want to write something that will be read by a sociologist of contemporary China, for example, or you know, you're way more likely to get that if the book is accessibly written, even if it's published by Chicago or Princeton or what have you. That's not actually going to make any difference to the ultimately. And I actually do believe that it's something I'm coming more and more to see is that it ultimately doesn't matter that much who the publisher is. What's important is that the product is actually well written and accessible and engaging and enjoyable. I mean, obviously there are ways in which it matters. I mean, obviously Random House and Simon and Schuster are able to pay larger advances and do a bit more publicity and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I think most of the people I work with, what I find very gratifying are people who just really, really care about writing a good book, who've written like 3 or 4 books at this point in their lives that, honestly, not that many people have read outside their field and just
Right.
tired of that and just really want to do a book that people read, even if it's not tens of thousands of people, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, let's face it, by the time you get to, the middle of your career and you've written 2 or 3 or 4 books and you've written, dozens of articles, um, often you get sort of sick of writing the same old kind of academic prose. And I had lost some of my enthusiasm for book writing, and you know rethinking the project of writing a book is invigorating, right? I mean, I guess in other words, a book that is a book that is enjoyable or accessible for a wider audience is, most likely going to be a more enjoyable book to write, and and you can get more enthusiastic about writing it. And so, I mean, I think another way of looking at this is like, you hit a sort of a midlife crisis as a senior-ish academic, and you ask yourself, well, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Um, and writing doesn't really feel fun anymore. And this is a way to kind of inject some of the spirit of fun and experimentation, etc., at a point in your career when things feel a little stale.
It's funny you say that, this idea of the midlife crisis, right? Because I mean, you and I were about the same age, right? And I mean, I actually do think, it's sometimes I do feel that like there is this way in which everybody I work with is about at the similar point in life to me, where it's kind of like, look, I've written a bunch of books for my field. I've got the tenure. I've got um, I've got the full professorship, the endowed chair, whatever it is. I'm well. And now what? I'm still like 50. I'm not like,
Yeah,
I'm not dead yet. I got a couple more books I want to write. But this isn't really why I got into this. I didn't go to grad school because I wanted to write a bunch of jargon-filled books that sell 500 copies, to libraries and then nobody else reads them. And I often find that for people I work with, it's this existential moment in life where it's kind of like, what do I want to do before I ride out into the sunset? I got a couple more books maybe in me. Like, what do I want to give back to the world? And, um, yeah, I mean, I bought a motorcycle when I hit my midlife crisis, but, so everyone handles these things differently.
yeah, I
But
bought a very expensive guitar.
that's
Yeah,
right, so, but I think for a lot of people, it could be writing a trade book. Writing a trade book as a midlife crisis. I actually
yeah,
feel that could be the name of this video. So maybe we'll see
yeah.
that way. But
Right, right,
uh,
right. Well, and the other thing is that, working with you, helped me realize that, um, you know, the the things that I personally care about, I want to invest myself in. I want to invest, I want my own authorial voice to be more present. I mean, and like, one of the differences I think that people perceive between a kind of an academic monograph and a trade book is that, in a trade book, you can put more of yourself into it. It can, whether that's writing personally about yourself or just, expressing your own, opinions and feelings about things. And I don't think that there necessarily, again, has to be a sharp, boundary between that sort of writing in trade or in academic writing. I mean, a couple of books that I've recently read that are more or less academic monographs read with colleagues. Are somewhat experimental, somewhat, more personal, etc. And I think that, for me at least, writing in this sort of impersonal, objective, frame of a monograph, not only does it feel stale, it feels a little bit false, like in a way, right? Like, I mean, we're people,
yeah.
we're people, and yeah, there's peer review and stuff like that. You can't just say, whatever you want, but by this point in your career, you know things. Like you have good reason for the opinions and the, kind of the personal stance you have on things, and that should be reflected in your scholarship. I mean, maybe that's less appropriate when you're a postdoc writing your first book or something like that. But by this point, um, it helps to restore a sort of confidence in, the kind of confidence that you have when you're lecturing a big class about a subject that you know really, really well, and you can just extemporate and, answer questions from left field, things like that. Or, for example, I mean, the most fun part of any public talk that I've ever given is a Q&A, where you get to just kind of be on the fly and, bringing some of that, um, more authentic, kind of organic, feel into the writing is something that I really want to do. I mean, we're taught to be so careful about everything we say, and of
Mhm.
course you have to be careful about facts and things like that, but too much carefulness, leads to, you know, boring writing, uh, you know, like, you know, uh, kind of tentative arguments, things like that. And so part of the process is just a kind of freeing oneself up.
So, yeah, I always say careful writing is bad writing, and you have to, to some degree, like what you were saying, I mean, this kind of confidence, this kind of swagger that comes at a certain point in your career, you got to embrace that.
Yeah,
Remember that you're kind of an elder statesperson now in your field, and you're not writing this kind of tentative monograph. You're not a junior academic, you're not a grad student, writing a dissertation. It's okay. You've learned some things over 20 plus years, and it's okay to make some sweeping statements and to have some opinions and some things you want to say to the world. That's what
yeah,
a good trade book really should be. I don't want to. I want to keep this. I want to keep this relatively short, but I do want to ask you. Um, can you talk a little bit about the actual process of us working together and
yeah, sure. I
what that
mean,
was
so
like? What kind of you felt like worked well? What didn't? Kind of
yeah.
what.
Well, I wanted to say that, in addition to just the sort of the demystification and the education that I got about the process of trade publishing, is extremely valuable also just to kind of hone in on what the core of the project is and what I mean, so working with you um, allowed me time to kind of really work through like what am I trying to say here? And it's helpful in fact that you're a historian, I'm a historian, we work on very different things. You understand the profession, of course, but you weren't an expert in the topic that I was writing on. The topic is sort of race, biology, and politics. Um, but you are a keen, reader and you were a great kind of sounding board for ideas and a great interlocutor for kind of figuring out, well, like, are you really trying to say this, or what is the beating heart of this, of this project? So basically, working together, I mean, we had a long conversation where we just kind of talked through ideas about the book. I sort of explained what I thought the book was trying to do. And then you asked me to do some writing to, kind of begin to draft, parts of what would become the trade proposal. So, like, let's start getting some paragraphs down about, that are sort of an engaging narrative summary of the book. And we worked through a bunch of drafts. I mean, I have a folder on my hard drive and it's got like I mean, I don't want to scare people, but it's got like 20 drafts. And I mean, that may not be how everybody
Result
works.
mileage may vary. So
Yeah,
I would say most
exactly.
clients I work with who don't go through 20 drops. So don't let
Sure.
that scare you away.
Yeah, but I mean, but for me, working through an iterative process like that is actually very helpful. In many ways, it's like what I do with my students when they're working on a dissertation proposal or a big grant proposal, where it's just a matter of back and forth, back and forth. And I don't mean I was rewriting it in major ways, at every stage, um, but that iterative process, is a continuation of the conversation that we would have, and then we would meet every couple of weeks and talk through things again. But the conversation kind of would continue in my head and in the writing that I was doing. And so I would like hear John, in my head saying like, like you're getting into the weeds, and so
Yeah,
it was
I like to live rent free in people's heads. It's good. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was about 3 months or so of this kind of iterative process where over time we began to put together, the pieces of the trade proposal, the kind of hook, the narrative summary, a chapter outline, marketing plan, things like that. And we just sort of approached it step by step. And over that period of time, not only did I feel more confident about writing the trade proposal itself, but I also felt more confident that I knew what the book was about, and so I thought I knew what the book was about when we began talking, but John, you pushed me at a variety of stages to really, to really think hard about certain choices about what to include in the narrative or how to shape the narrative or how to frame the narrative. And again, it's not like you were telling me, do this, do that, do that. It was more you were guiding me, through my own thought process and providing important questions or insights or pushing me in particular directions at particular stages that helped me with my own process, right? I mean, you don't have hard and fast rules that you give about, exactly what a proposal is supposed to look like or exactly what a trade book is supposed to be, but you helped me figure out what the trade book that was inside me, was. And so that's what I really think people can get out of this process. I mean, someone might come to you with a great idea for what could be, a really solid academic monograph, but you help um, to see what is going to engage a more general reader and why the story matters, maybe why it's topical now or why it's something that uh, a general reader might not realize that they want to read. And so that perspective, I mean, because again, people who come to you know how to write books,
Mm.
but we also have been working independently for so long. Aside from feedback that we might get from colleagues that we might send a chapter to here or there or whatever, we're not really um, sort of questioning or engaging with our own writing process as much. We're kind of already, stuck in a channel, and so breaking out of that channel was just, amazingly, amazingly helpful.
I'm glad to hear it. And listen, I had a lot of fun. I hope you had some fun as well.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah. No, our
really
meetings
fun.
were fun. I mean, they were, and you really do make yourself very available. I mean, John means it when he says that, during the period of time that you're working together, like, that, he'll be responsive and available and you gave us I mean, I mean, the other thing is like actually getting things done. Like, so that's so like, let's say you've got a sabbatical, or let's say you've put your summer aside and you're saying, okay, I'm gonna begin working on this book. Yeah, and then you know what happens. Like, you're got issues with your kids or whatever. And, we never, no academic I've ever met is satisfied with the work that they get done over you know, a leave or a sabbatical or a summer or something like that. So, I mean, honestly, from just a kind of purely practical standpoint, working with you gave me incentives and deadlines that helped me actually get done what I wanted to get done over the summer. And so the accountability that it gave me was really important, really, really important as well. And you're not like a, you know, martinet or something like that. You're not like a drill sergeant. But I knew, okay, I'm meeting with John next week. I really want to have this done so that I get the most out of the work that we're doing together.
Yeah, it's funny. I hear that a lot, and I always say that's the easiest part of my job, but it seems to be what people really value is just like being held accountable. Well, listen, it's been really great to talk about this again and to catch up, and I'm so excited for you and the success that you had with this, and but very briefly for the kids out there, what's the book about?
Yeah, so the book's about kind of the history of um, biological um, debates about the kind of the nature of human genetic and biological difference framed within kind of the last 100 years or so of American politics. And it really is sort of about how over the last 50 years, understandings of especially like genetic differences between men and women or different populations or so-called races, how that's informed the political conversation about you know equity in American culture and society, and ultimately is an attempt to try to explain why we're still grappling with you know contentious issues about what makes us different in our political moment today. And most people wouldn't really think that like science was contributing to racism or sexism or something like that. But what scientists have had to say about what makes us different has gotten picked up in the political culture and political conversation, and it's an attempt to try to inform a general reader about how to understand and view science, science around biological difference and genetic difference, but also about how to be more invested in are, kind of the political culture and informed about, um, what we do and don't know, or what we can and can't learn from, our genes alone.
I can't think of anything that's more relevant to the moment that we're living in today. So,
Yeah, unfortunately, but
yes,
yeah,
so we can all look out for that from Princeton University Press in 2020 something, right?
26-ish. I mean, I'm supposed to deliver in mid to later 2026. So we'll see, but maybe early 2027.
Okay,
We'll see.
okay, terrific. David Sepkoski, everybody, thank you so much for joining us and talking.
Thanks a lot.